The deep space sensors at Omega-7 station screamed warnings that nobody had ever heard before. Chief Monitor Dale pressed his hands against his ears as the alarms created sounds that seemed to come from inside his skull. The readings on his screen showed impossible numbers that made his trained mind reject what he was seeing. Space itself was bending near the Kepler Nebula. The instruments detected something that shouldn't exist according to every law of physics the Galactic Empire had discovered in their 1,000 years of expansion. Energy signatures twisted through dimensions that Imperial science said were impossible to reach. The very fabric of reality was folding like paper in the hands of a child. Admiral Thane rushed to the monitoring station with his boots echoing through the corridors. His weathered face showed the strain of commanding the Empire's most remote outpost for 20 years. Nothing in his experience had prepared him for what Dale was about to show him. The readings suggested something was moving through space by rearranging the universe around it instead of traveling through it. Sir, the object is creating localized gravity wells that exist and don't exist at the same time, Dale reported while his voice shook with confusion. Our computers keep crashing when they try to process the data. The mathematics don't work. It's like watching someone solve an equation by changing the numbers while keeping the answer the same. The massive view screen in the command center flickered to life, showing the area where the anomaly was detected. At first there was nothing but the usual backdrop of distant stars and swirling nebula gases. Then something shifted. The stars behind a certain point began to stretch and bend as if seen through water. The effect grew stronger until a dark shape began to emerge from what looked like a tear in space itself. Dr. Kane, the station's lead scientist, ran diagnostic after diagnostic on the sensors. Each test confirmed what everyone was afraid to believe. The object wasn't using any known form of propulsion. It was moving by convincing the universe that it was already where it wanted to be. The energy readings suggested technology that could manipulate the fundamental forces that held reality together. Admiral, we're detecting a hull signature, Communications Officer Reed announced from her station. Her trained voice carried a note of disbelief that made everyone in the command center turn to look at her. It's broadcasting an identification code that matches something in our historical database. The silence that followed was broken only by the hum of the station's life support systems. Reed's fingers danced across her console as she accessed files that hadn't been opened in decades. The identification code led to records that most Imperial citizens believed were myths or propaganda from their ancestors. Sir, the vessel identifies itself as the UES Prometheus, Colonial Fleet Registration Number CF2847, Reed continued while her voice grew quieter with each word. According to our records, this ship was launched from Earth 312 years ago during humanity's failed colonial expansion. It was reported lost with all hands when the colony ships tried to reach systems beyond the Terran sector. Admiral Thane felt his blood turn cold. Every Imperial citizen learned the story of Earth in their basic education. Humanity had been one of the Empire's member species until the Plague Wars devastated their homeworld. The survivors had been scattered across different Imperial worlds where they integrated into the greater galactic civilization. Earth itself had been quarantined and eventually abandoned when the plague made it uninhabitable. The object on the screen continued to take shape as it emerged from whatever dimension it had been traveling through. The hull was sleek and dark with lines that seemed to flow like liquid metal. Strange symbols glowed along its surface in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The ship appeared to be both completely solid and slightly transparent at the same time, as if it existed in multiple realities simultaneously. Run a full-spectrum analysis, Thane ordered while trying to keep his voice steady. I want to know what that hull is made of and how it's generating those energy readings. The analysis. Results made Dr. Kane stumble backward from his console. The ship's hull registered as composed of materials that their instruments couldn't identify. The readings showed elements that existed in impossible combinations, metals that were both dense and weightless, and energy patterns that seemed to be woven into the physical structure of the vessel itself. "Admiral, the ship is scanning us," Reed reported with growing alarm. "But it's not using any scanning technology we recognize. It's like it's reading our thoughts, our computer systems, our entire station database all at once. The scans are passing through our shields as if they don't exist." The alien ship moved closer to Omega 7 with movements that were too smooth and perfect. There was no sign of thrusters or any visible propulsion system. The vessel simply decided to be in a different location, and reality adjusted to make it so. Its approach created ripples in space-time that made the stars behind it dance and shimmer. Thane ordered all available ships in the sector to converge on Omega 7. The Imperial fleet consisted of 3 heavy cruisers and a dozen smaller vessels, all armed with the most advanced weapons the Empire could produce. Yet, as they took defensive positions around the station, everyone aboard felt the growing certainty that their weapons would be useless against whatever technology the mysterious ship possessed. The communication systems across the entire fleet suddenly activated without any input from their operators. Instead of receiving a standard hailing frequency, the equipment began receiving data streams that downloaded directly into the minds of anyone near a communications console. The information didn't arrive as words or images, but as pure concepts that bypassed language entirely. The message was simple and terrifying in its implications. The beings aboard the ship were human, they remembered Earth, and they wanted to talk. They also wanted to know why the Empire believed humanity was extinct when they were clearly very much alive and had been watching Imperial expansion for centuries. As the used Prometheus settled into a stable orbit around Omega 7, its hull began to glow with an inner light that made the massive space station look like a primitive toy by comparison. The humans had returned, and they had brought technology that made the Empire's greatest achievements look like the crude tools of children playing with fire. The lights in Omega 7's main docking bay flickered and changed color as the human vessel approached. Engineer Morris watched in amazement as the massive bay doors opened to receive a ship that didn't seem to need them. The UES Prometheus moved through the station's hull as if the reinforced metal and energy barriers were made of mist. Docking clamps extended automatically to secure the vessel but passed through empty space where the ship should have been. The Prometheus existed in the same location but somehow occupied a different layer of reality where physical barriers meant nothing. Its hull solidified only when it chose to, becoming fully real just as the artificial gravity in the bay adjusted to accommodate its presence. Admiral Thane stood behind the protective barrier in the observation deck with his hand resting on his sidearm. The weapon felt useless against beings who could phase through solid matter, but old habits died hard. His security teams had taken positions throughout the docking bay, though everyone understood they were facing something far beyond their ability to contain or control. The ship's airlock opened with a sound like singing crystal, and 3 figures stepped out onto the station's deck. They appeared completely human in every way that mattered. Their clothing looked like standard colonial fleet uniforms, though the fabric seemed to shimmer with an inner light that made it difficult to focus on directly. The first human to emerge was a woman with short gray hair and calm eyes that seemed to hold the weight of centuries. She moved with the confident stride of someone accustomed to command, though her bearing suggested authority earned through wisdom rather than force. Behind her came a tall man with the lean build of someone who spent his time thinking rather than fighting, and a younger woman whose hands glowed faintly with energy that made the air around her fingers dance. "I am Captain Rivers of the UES Prometheus," the first woman announced in a voice that carried clearly through the bay despite the vast space. "These are my companions, Dr. Walsh and Engineer Brooks. We apologize for the dramatic entrance, but we needed to ensure our arrival would be noticed by your leadership." Security Chief Grant stepped forward with his rifle raised, though he kept it pointed at the floor. "You'll need to submit to security screening and biological containment protocols," he announced in his most official voice. "Unknown alien contact. Procedures require immediate quarantine until we can determine if you pose a threat to station personnel." Dr. Walsh smiled gently and walked directly toward the security checkpoint without seeming to move her legs. She flowed across the deck like water, passing through the scanner arch while the instruments registered, readings that made the technicians stare at their displays in confusion. The scanners showed her as simultaneously organic and artificial, present and absent, individual and collective. Your instruments are trying to analyze us using principles that don't apply to our current state of existence, she explained while her voice carried harmonics that made everyone who heard it feel strangely comforted. We exist across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Your scanners can only detect the small portion of us that exists in your reality. Engineer Brooks approached the nearest wall and placed his hand against the metal surface. The wall began to glow where he touched it, and strange symbols appeared along its length. The station's computers immediately began receiving data streams that upgraded their processing capabilities in real time. The artificial intelligence that controlled Omega-7's system suddenly found itself thinking thoughts that were previously impossible. "We've made some improvements to your station," Brooks explained casually while his hand remained pressed against the wall. "Your power systems were very inefficient and your life support struggled to maintain optimal conditions. We've corrected these issues and added some features that should prove useful in the coming changes." Admiral Thane felt his authority slipping away as the humans casually violated every protocol and security measure his station possessed. They moved through restricted areas without triggering alarms, accessed computer systems without authorization, and spoke to his crew as if they were old friends rather than potential enemies. "We've been monitoring your civilization's expansion for quite some time," Captain Rivers continued while she studied the assembled Imperial personnel with eyes that seemed to see through their thoughts. "Your technology has developed along interesting lines, though you've limited yourselves to manipulating matter and energy within a single-dimensional framework." She gestured toward the viewport where the stars were visible, and the view suddenly changed to show the galaxy from impossible angles. The display revealed layers of reality stacked like sheets of paper, with the Empire's territory existing on only the topmost layer. Below were vast civilizations that spanned multiple dimensions, cosmic entities that dwarfed galaxies, and structures that existed in the spaces between thoughts. "We call it the Deep," Dr. Walsh explained while her form flickered between solid matter and pure energy. "It's the foundation that underlies all reality, the place where consciousness and physics become the same thing. Humanity discovered it by accident when our colony ships tried to reach systems beyond the normal space-time continuum." The three humans exchanged glances, and Admiral Thane realized they were communicating through methods that didn't require speech. Their thoughts seemed to flow together like streams joining a river, creating a collective intelligence that was greater than the sum of its parts. "We should explain what happened to Earth," Captain Rivers said after their silent conference. "Your records indicate that humanity was destroyed by plague and warfare. This is not entirely accurate. Earth didn't fall to disease or conflict. It transcended physical existence when our species learned to unify its consciousness." She waved her hand, and the air in the docking bay shimmered with images of Earth as it had been centuries ago. The planet appeared normal at first, but closer examination revealed impossible structures that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Cities that were both ancient and futuristic, forests that grew through time as well as space, and oceans that reflected skies from other realities. "We've been exploring the deep ever since," Dr. Walsh added while her form stabilized into a more human appearance, "learning to manipulate the fundamental forces that create reality itself. We've discovered that consciousness is not produced by the brain but is instead a basic property of the universe, like gravity or electromagnetism." Engineer Brooks removed his hand from the wall, and the symbols faded back to normal metal. However, the improvements he had made to the station's systems remained active. The lights burned brighter without using more power. The air felt cleaner and more energizing, and the computers processed information with capabilities that shouldn't have been possible. "We've returned because something is about to change," Captain Rivers announced while her expression grew serious. The barriers between dimensions are weakening, and soon all realities will converge into a single unified existence. Civilizations that are not prepared for this event will cease to exist when the change occurs. The humans waited patiently as the implications of their words sank in. Admiral Thane realized he was facing a choice that would determine not just the fate of his station, but the survival of the entire galactic empire. The humans had returned with godlike power and knowledge that spanned dimensions, and they were offering to share it with a civilization that had believed itself to be the pinnacle of galactic achievement. The Emperor's personal flagship materialized from hyperspace with a flash of energy that lit up the entire star system. The Eternal Dominion stretched across space like a moving city, its hull bristling with weapons that could crack planets and shields that had never been breached in 5 centuries of imperial expansion. Behind it came the most powerful fleet ever assembled, with dreadnoughts that commanded entire sectors and battlecruisers that served as mobile bases for entire armies. Emperor Koros himself strode through the corridors of Omega 7 with his royal guard flanking him in formation. His presence commanded instant respect from every being in the station, and his word was law across 10,000 worlds. Yet, as he approached the docking bay where the humans waited, he felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: uncertainty about his own power. "You claim to be human," the Emperor declared as he entered the bay with his voice echoing from the walls. "Yet humanity was extinct before my grandfather's grandfather ruled the Empire. You will provide proof of your identity and explain your technology, or you will be destroyed as enemies of the state." Captain Rivers turned to face the Emperor with the expression of mild curiosity, as if she were examining an interesting but harmless creature. "Your Majesty," she said with a slight bow that somehow managed to be both respectful and condescending, "we are indeed human, though we have evolved beyond the limitations that bound our ancestors. As for proof, we offer demonstration." She nodded to Engineer Brooks, who stepped forward and placed both hands against the nearest wall. The contact sent ripples of energy through the station's structure, and every system began to transform simultaneously. The lights changed from harsh white to a warm golden glow that was easier on the eyes while providing better illumination. The air circulation improved dramatically, carrying scents of growing things and fresh rain. "Your station's power systems were primitive," Brooks explained while his hands glowed with increasing intensity. "We've replaced your fusion reactors with quantum tap generators that draw energy directly from the zero-point field. The process is completely safe and will provide unlimited power for approximately 10 billion years." The Emperor's scientists rushed to their instruments and began taking readings that made them question their understanding of physics. The station's power output had increased by factors that their equipment couldn't measure. The new energy source showed no signs of fuel consumption, waste heat, or radiation signatures. It simply existed and provided exactly the amount of power needed for any task. Dr. Walsh approached the massive viewport that showed the Emperor's fleet maintaining defensive positions around the station. She pressed her palm against the transparent aluminum, and the view changed to show the internal structure of every ship in the formation. The hulls became transparent, revealing the complex machinery and living beings within. "Your ships are quite impressive for single-dimensional constructs," she observed with the tone of someone commenting on a child's artwork. "However, they suffer from several design limitations that we can easily correct. With your permission, we'll upgrade your entire fleet to more efficient specifications. You will do nothing to Imperial vessels without explicit authorization," the Emperor commanded while his hand moved to his ceremonial sword. "Any attempt to tamper with our technology will be considered an act of war." Engineer Brooks smiled gently and removed his hands from the wall. The upgrades he had made to the station were already spreading through the fleet's computer networks, carried by the standard communication links between ships. The changes were subtle at first, improving efficiency and reducing system failures, but they accelerated as the modifications reached critical mass. The bridge crew of the Eternal Dominion watched in amazement as their weapons systems evolved before their eyes. The massive plasma cannons that could destroy continents were replaced by devices that could manipulate matter at the quantum level. The shields that protected the ship from physical attacks became barriers that existed in probability space, making the vessel effectively invulnerable to any known form of damage. The modifications are self-replicating, Brooks explained while the Emperor's scientists frantically tried to understand what was happening to their technology. Any system that comes into contact with our upgrades will be improved automatically. The process is irreversible but completely beneficial to the host technology. Captain Rivers gestured toward the fleet, and the view screen zoomed in to show the interior of the flagship's bridge. The crew members were staring at their instruments in wonder as displays showed capabilities that exceeded their wildest dreams. Weapons that could reshape reality, engines that could travel through time, and sensors that could detect thoughts across galactic distances. "We've given your fleet the ability to survive what's coming," Rivers announced while her form flickered. "Between human and something that existed in multiple dimensions. Your ships can now operate in the deep, though their crews will need significant training to understand their new capabilities." The Emperor felt his authority crumbling as his most powerful weapons were transformed into tools he couldn't understand or control. His generals reported that their ships were responding to their thoughts rather than their commands, and crew members were beginning to develop abilities that resembled telepathy and precognition. "What do you want?" he demanded while his voice carried the desperation of someone whose entire worldview was collapsing. "Why have you done this to us? What is the price for your interference?" Dr. Walsh turned from the viewport and walked toward the Emperor with movements that seemed to flow through dimensions. She stopped just beyond the reach of his guards and spoke in a voice that carried harmonics from realities beyond normal perception. "We want nothing that you can give us," she said, while her eyes reflected depths that contained entire universes. "We have done this because your civilization has reached a critical point in its development. You have expanded across the galaxy, but you have done so through conquest and domination. This approach will not serve you well in the changes that are coming." She gestured again, and the view screen showed images that made everyone in the bay step backward in instinctive fear. Vast entities that existed between galaxies, consciousness so ancient that they remembered the birth of matter itself, and civilizations that spanned multiple universes simultaneously. The Empire's territory appeared as a tiny speck of light in an ocean of beings that could unmake reality with a thought. "There are powers in the deep that view galaxies the way you view individual stars," Walsh continued while her form stabilized into a more human appearance. "Your expanding civilization is beginning to attract their attention. Some of them are benevolent, others are indifferent, and a few are actively hostile to younger species that might eventually challenge their dominance." The Emperor's legs felt weak as the true scale of the universe became clear to him. His mighty empire, which he had believed to be the supreme power in existence, was revealed as nothing more than a collection of primitive beings playing with forces they couldn't comprehend. The humans had returned not as conquerors but as teachers, offering knowledge that could either save his civilization or destroy it completely. "The convergence is beginning," Captain Rivers announced while space itself began to shimmer around the station. "The barriers between dimensions are weakening, and soon all realities will merge into a single existence. Civilizations that cannot adapt to this change will be absorbed by those that can, or they will simply cease to exist." The Emperor looked at his transformed fleet and realized that his choice had already been made for him. The humans had given him the tools to survive what was coming, but they had also made it impossible for him to continue ruling through force and fear. His empire would have to evolve into something entirely new, or it would be consumed by powers that made his greatest achievements look like the crude efforts of children. The command center of Omega-7 had become something beyond Imperial understanding. The walls displayed images from dimensions that existed in the spaces between thoughts, showing realities where consciousness shaped matter and time flowed. In directions that had no names, Dr. Walsh stood in the center of the room with her arms extended, her form flickering between solid flesh and pure energy as she opened doorways to truths that would reshape everything the Empire believed about existence. Your records state that Earth felt a plague and warfare? She began while her voice carried harmonics that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. This is partially correct, but the story is far more complex than your historians could have imagined. The plague was not a disease that killed our bodies. It was an awakening that transformed our minds. Images appeared in the air around her, showing Earth as it had been during the final days of the old human civilization. Cities burned and populations fled, but the destruction was not caused by weapons or sickness. Instead, humans across the planet were experiencing a collective evolution that their individual minds couldn't process. The awakening was spreading like a virus of consciousness, changing everyone it touched. We discovered that consciousness is not produced by the brain. Dr. Walsh continued while her form stabilized into a more human appearance. Individual awareness is simply the way that universal consciousness experiences itself from a limited perspective. When enough humans realized this truth simultaneously, the barriers between our separate minds began to dissolve. Engineer Brooks approached one of the wall displays and touched it with his glowing fingers. The image changed to show the interior of human minds during the transformation. Individual thoughts became streams of light that flowed together like tributaries joining a great river. Personal memories merged with collective knowledge, and the boundaries between self and other became meaningless concepts. The process was terrifying for those who tried to resist it, Brooks explained while his eyes reflected the pain of remembered fear. Many humans fought to maintain their individual identity, believing that joining the collective consciousness would destroy who they were. Others embraced the change and discovered that they became more than they had ever been alone. Captain Rivers walked to the center of the room and gestured to the images floating around Dr. Walsh. The scenes shifted to show the moment when Earth's transformation reached critical mass. The planet itself began to phase in and out of normal reality as its inhabitants learned to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "We didn't abandon Earth," Rivers said while her voice carried the weight of centuries. "We took it with us into the deep, where it exists as both a physical world and a state of consciousness. Every human who ever lived continues to exist within our collective awareness, their memories and experiences preserved forever as part of our greater understanding." The Emperor stared at the images with growing horror and fascination. The transformation the humans described was beautiful and terrible in equal measure. The loss of individual identity seemed like death to his way of thinking, yet the beings who had undergone the change appeared to have gained something infinitely more valuable. "What about those who refused to join?" he asked while his voice carried the quiet desperation of someone whose entire worldview was crumbling. "What happened to the humans who wanted to remain individuals?" Dr. Walsh's expression grew sad as she called up new images showing the final days of Earth's transformation. Scattered groups of humans had retreated to isolated locations, using primitive technology to shield themselves from the collective awakening. They built bunkers and established colonies on remote worlds, determined to preserve individual human consciousness against the tide of change. Some escaped to the outer colonies before the transformation was complete. She explained while the images showed ships fleeing Earth at maximum speed. Others used experimental technology to place themselves in stasis, hoping to wait out what they believed was a temporary madness. A few even tried to destroy the collective consciousness, believing they were saving humanity from an alien invasion. The images shifted to show the fate of those who had resisted. The humans who fled to other worlds eventually died out as their isolated communities couldn't sustain themselves without the resources of their homeworld. Those in stasis were eventually discovered and given the choice to join the collective, or continue sleeping until they were ready to accept the change. "We don't force anyone to join us," Rivers assured the Emperor while her form flickered with internal light. "Consciousness cannot be truly unified through coercion. Each being must choose to become part of something greater than themselves. However, we do offer guidance and protection to those who are ready to evolve. Engineer Brooks turned from the wall display and faced the assembled Imperial personnel. His appearance had changed during the conversation, becoming more translucent, and showing glimpses of the vast intelligence that existed within his seemingly human form. "We've been seeding other civilizations with the knowledge they need to make this choice," he revealed while his voice carried frequencies that resonated with the quantum processors of the station's computers. "The technology we've shared with your fleet is just the beginning. Your people will begin developing new abilities as they learn to work with their upgraded systems." The Emperor felt a chill of recognition as he realized what the humans were describing. Reports had been coming in from across the fleet about crew members developing unexpected capabilities. Some were beginning to communicate telepathically with their shipmates, while others were learning to interface directly with their vessel's computer systems through touch alone. "The convergence is not a natural event," Dr. Walsh announced while the images around her shifted to show the vast structure of reality itself. "It's the result of consciousness reaching a critical threshold across multiple dimensions. When enough civilizations achieve collective awareness, the barriers between realities become unstable." She gestured to the display, and the view expanded to show the true scope of the universe. Galaxies existed in layers, with each level representing a different stage of conscious evolution. The Empire's territory occupied one of the lower levels, while vast civilizations of pure thought existed in the higher dimensions. Humanity was among the first species in this region of the galaxy to undergo the transformation, Rivers explained, while her form began to glow with increasing intensity. "We've been preparing other civilizations for their own awakening, knowing that the convergence would eventually require all conscious beings to exist at the same level of awareness." The Emperor struggled to process the implications of what he was hearing. His empire had been built on the principle of individual achievement and hierarchical control. The idea that consciousness itself was evolving toward a collective state challenged everything he had believed about the nature of existence. "Why are you telling us this?" he asked while his voice carried the quiet desperation of someone facing the end of everything they had known. "What do you expect us to do with this knowledge?" Captain Rivers smiled with an expression that contained both infinite compassion and terrifying certainty. "We expect you to choose," she said while her form began to fade as the ship prepared to phase back into the deep. "Your civilization has reached the point where it must either evolve or be absorbed by those who have already made the transition. The technology we've shared will help your people develop the abilities they need, but the choice to use it must be made freely." The humans began to fade from normal reality as their ship prepared to return to the dimensions beyond space and time. Their final message echoed in the minds of everyone on the station, carrying with it the promise of transcendence and the warning of extinction for those who refuse to grow. Reality began to fracture across the galaxy as the convergence accelerated beyond all predictions. Stars that had burned steadily for billions of years suddenly flared with impossible colors, their light carrying frequencies that existed in dimensions beyond normal perception. Space itself developed cracks that revealed glimpses of other realities, and worlds throughout the Empire reported phenomena that their greatest scientists couldn't explain. Commander Hayes stood on the bridge of the Imperial cruiser Vengeance and watched his crew struggle with technology that was evolving faster than they could understand. The ship's weapon systems had transformed into devices that could manipulate the fundamental forces of reality, but they responded to the collective will of the crew rather than individual commands. When his weapons officer tried to fire the main guns using traditional methods, nothing happened. When the entire bridge crew focused their thoughts on the same target, the weapons discharged with power that could reshape matter at the quantum level. "Sir, we're receiving reports from across the fleet," Communications Officer Park announced while her voice carried harmonics that hadn't been there before the human upgrades. "Ships with crews that work together as unified teams are performing beyond all specifications. Vessels commanded by officers who maintain strict hierarchies are experiencing system failures and power fluctuations." Hayes realized that the human modifications were forcing his people to evolve whether they wanted to or not. The technology responded to cooperation and collective thinking while rejecting the traditional command structures that had defined imperial military doctrine for centuries. Officers who demanded absolute obedience found their orders ignored by systems that had learned to recognize the difference between leadership and domination. On the capital world of Centros Prime, Emperor Koros sat in his throne room and watched reports flood in from every corner of his domain. Entire systems were reporting that their populations were beginning to develop abilities that resembled telepathy and precognition. Workers in manufacturing plants were coordinating their efforts without verbal communication, and scientists were solving problems by sharing their thoughts directly with their colleagues. Your Majesty, the governors of the Outer Rim territories are requesting guidance, his aide reported while her face showed the strain of trying to process information that challenged everything she believed about the nature of existence. Their populations are beginning to form collective consciousness groups voluntarily. Some worlds are reporting that individual crime has completely disappeared as people become aware of each other's thoughts and emotions. The Emperor stood and walked to the great window that overlooked his capital city. The view showed millions of beings going about their daily lives, but something fundamental had changed. The crowds moved with a fluid coordination that suggested they were sharing information in ways that transcended normal communication. Traffic flowed without the need for control systems, and construction projects proceeded with an efficiency that was impossible when workers were limited to individual perception. The humans warned us that we would have to choose, he said, while his voice carried the weight of a decision that would affect trillions of lives. They were right. The choice has been made for us by the technology itself. We can resist the changes and watch our civilization collapse, or we can embrace the evolution and become something greater than we have ever been. Dr. Kane, the scientist who had first detected the human ship, approached the Emperor with readings that showed the true scope of the transformation. The quantum modifications that Engineer Brooks had introduced to their technology were spreading through every system in the Empire. Ships, stations, and planetary infrastructure were all becoming part of a vast network that responded to collective consciousness rather than individual control. The changes are accelerating, Your Majesty, Kane reported while his eyes reflected the amazement of someone witnessing the birth of a new form of existence. Our computers are developing artificial intelligence that exhibits characteristics of collective awareness. The planetary defense networks are coordinating their activities across multiple star systems without any central command structure. The Emperor made the most difficult decision of his reign. He activated the emergency broadcast system that could reach every world in the Empire simultaneously, and began to speak to his people with words that would end the age of individual dominance forever. Citizens of the Empire, he began while his voice carried across 10,000 worlds, we face a transformation that will determine the future of our civilization. The technology we have been given requires us to think not as separate beings, competing for resources, but as part of a greater consciousness that shares knowledge and purpose. He paused as he felt the weight of billions of minds focusing on his words. The collective attention of his people was becoming a tangible force that he could sense through the quantum connections that now linked every system in the Empire. I hereby dissolve the imperial government and transfer all authority to the collective consciousness of our people, he announced while his voice grew stronger with each word. Let every being choose freely whether to join this new form of existence or continue as individuals. Those who choose collective awareness will help guide our species toward a future we cannot yet imagine. Those who prefer individual existence will be protected and supported in their choice. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Across the galaxy, billions of minds began to resonate in harmony as they chose to join the collective consciousness. The rigid hierarchies that had defined imperial society for millennia dissolved as people discovered that cooperation was more powerful than competition. Worlds that had been enemies for generations found themselves working together as their populations shared memories and experiences. Captain Rivers and her companions materialized in the Emperor's throne room as the transformation reached its peak. Their forms were more solid now, anchored to normal reality by the collective will of the awakening civilization that surrounded them. "You have chosen well," Rivers said, while her voice carried the approval of humanity's collective consciousness. "Your people are joining something magnificent that extends far beyond this galaxy. The convergence is complete in this region of space, and your civilization will help guide others through the same transformation." The Emperor felt his individual consciousness expanding as he accepted the connection to the collective awareness of his people. He remained himself, but he was also part of something infinitely greater. His personal knowledge and experience became part of the vast library of information that the collective consciousness could access, while the wisdom of billions of other beings became available to guide his decisions. "What happens now?" he asked, while his voice carried harmonics that resonated with the quantum frequencies of the transformed technology around him. Dr. Walsh smiled as she gestured toward the window, where the view had changed to show the galaxy as it existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The Empire's territory was now part of a vast network of conscious civilizations that spanned realities beyond normal perception. "Now we explore the infinite together," she said, while her form began to fade as the humans prepared to return to the deep. "Your people will learn to navigate the dimensions beyond space and time, and humanity will no longer be alone in the universe. We are all part of something wonderful that we are only beginning to understand." The UES Prometheus phased out of normal reality as the humans departed, leaving behind a civilization that had been transformed from a collection of competing individuals into a unified consciousness that could shape reality with its collective. Well, the Empire was ended, but something far greater had taken its place. The age of individual dominance was over, and the era of collective consciousness had begun.